On this week's episode, it's another edition of Proud of Portugal with our Proud of Portugal resident expert Ricardo Monteiro. We discuss, amongst other things, current events, historical accounts, architecture, and things that are made in Portugal. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life, and it's the first Proud of Portugal episode for Season 2. Welcome back, Ricardo Monteiro, our Proud of Portugal expert. Ricardo, hello, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me again.
You're very welcome. I'm still upset with you. You know, we've known each other for a year, more than a year, and we still have never met in person. I've invited you for lunch.
We must have lunch. Last time
I invited you 3 times, and I even said I'll pay. So that's not the issue. You know, what's happening? Is it because of
COVID, for God's sake?
Yeah, it's COVID. We blame COVID. I'm going to blame COVID. And I'm going to blame CNN. You know,
yes, exactly.
CNN has stolen you from us.
Yeah.
How's that going?
CNN.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, you know, it's the same thing as people think it's like a different environment or a different thing, but CNN is just like TVI or SIG. It's the same thing. You know, it's a TV network. It's a news TV, cable TV network. That's all there is to it. You know,
yeah.
Just the same. There is nothing, absolutely nothing different to other.
I thought it would be a little bit different, but it wasn't.
No. It never is, because in the end, I mean, you were relying on the same professionals, you know, people who used to man other TV networks. So, you know, it's just, there is also a cultural kind of imprint into media, you know, there's like a common behavior, you know, that people just adopt anywhere they go. So that's the way it is. Yeah.
We'll be different. The podcast will be different here on the podcast.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
here we go.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to see Ricardo outside of the Portugal Simple Life podcast, go tune into CNN Portugal. He's there as well. Yeah, it's good.
Not every day, though.
Not every day. Yeah. Ricardo, it's another Proud of Portugal episode. This is number 5. This is our 5th one. Yeah, Proud of Portugal. Amazing. 5. So thank you again for always being available and for all the knowledge that you bring. But let's start off with current events. What in our current events, the latest things happening, make you proud of Portugal?
Well, you know that just a couple of days ago we celebrated the 48th anniversary of the Carnation Revolution. People think about, you know, it was a momentous day. I remember it vividly. I was 17 back then.
Wow.
And I was just in my last year of high school, just before going on to university. And at that time, all of the men in Portugal, there was something always dawning on them, which was the possibility of actually being sent to Africa, because, you know, the colonial wars were still raging. And I was 17, and the only way to avoid being immediately sent, you know, to the military service was to actually move on from high school onto the university. Then they would let you finish your degree in university, and then only later on would you be kind of drafted, because, you know, there was a draft, and every single man in Portugal was supposed to, do their bit at the military service. And I remember that as I was approaching 17, and the revolution had not taken place yet. And I was always thinking, well, you know, one of these days I've got to go to war. And my two older brothers had already been enrolled, drafted, and they were actually, one of them was still doing his military service in 1974. So when the revolution took place, the immediate relief I felt, you know, that's, you know,
that you didn't have to go to war.
I wouldn't have to go to war, which was quite, you know, was something quite extraordinary. So it did, you know, that just like, I think 2 months ago, we have finally passed the mark where we have lived more under democracy than under dictatorship, just a couple of months ago. So we are now an older democracy than we ever were at a dictatorship. So we should have come of age, and democracy should have delivered in ways that it has not. So on one hand, I'm quite proud that revolution took place, that I witnessed it, that it was, you know, something extraordinarily liberating for the country, for the people itself, and from the one thought that we were kind of impregnated with back then. And the things that we take for granted today, like gender equality, like just being able to express yourself in total freedom, were of course things that were denied to us before. But if I had to wrap up the result of the revolution and how it has influenced us, I would have to say a couple of things. Okay, first, it did bring people onto education. In 1974, only 90,000 people went on from secondary school to university. Okay, only 90,000 in the whole country. Today, there are about 300 to 400,000 every year. So you can see the difference there. Okay. And we were about 8 million then, with 10 million now, so the difference is not much. So really, there was huge improvement there in terms of education. Of course, access to free healthcare and all of that came with the revolution, and of course, a sense of equality and freedom in general. But we did fail in a couple of things that I think cannot go. We must realize that failure as a society, and we must try to actually right that wrong. One is the justice system. It is extremely slow. It does not provide justice within an acceptable time frame. It takes years and years and years for stuff to go to court and actually, see the end of it, as we can witness in the many famous, cases being tried, like the Banco Espírito Santo case and all of that. It was back in 2014 with 2022. We're still in the first instances of that case. So it's just absurd. So the judicial system does not, and the justice system in general does not work. And democracy without justice is not democracy, because that is the one instrument and the one power. There are three powers, as you know. One of the powers is the justice system, the judicial system, and if that does not work, the rest of society does not work properly either. So that is one of our huge failures. And the other one is economic development. We have not been able to fulfill all of our economical potential. And the fact that every year, and you hear that every day, that, we're falling behind. We were, 14th in the European Union 10 years ago. We're now 21st or 22nd. And so, and other countries, namely from Eastern Europe, are actually overtaking us in terms of GDP per capita on a purchasing power parity basis. It's not really that, a Romanian next year will make more than a Portuguese worker, because he will not in terms of absolute value, but relative to their purchasing power, they will be making more money than we are. So these two things are the two unfulfilled promises of the revolution. We still should be proud of it. It was a peaceful revolution, as you know. It was the dawning of a new age in many, many countries. It was taken as an example of the way one could change regime without bloodshed, without anything. Yeah. So I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what it brought to us. I think we must continue to strive to actually fulfill all of the potential of Portuguese society, namely in those two fields that I just mentioned. So that's it for the historical account.
Okay,
it was just a couple of days back, and in 2 years' time it'll be 50 years. So
yeah, 2 years will be 50. I want to just come back to the historical account, because one of the things is the people kind of know it as the Carnation Revolution. They know because of the red flower. It was like you mentioned, it was a bloodless or a peaceful revolution, which is amazing. What were some of the key things that happened on that day that people should know about? How it all came about? This had been building for a while, of course. Because for me, it's one thing it's quite an interesting thing in Portugal. It's something that's spoken about, but not spoken about a lot. Everyone kind of remembers it. Like you said, you were 17 years old. That's phenomenal. It actually reminds me, you've got the Mandela book behind you there. I was 12 when he was released from prison. I was 15 when we had our first free elections. I I think I was 12 or 13 when, like we started to mix schools with black and white. And I still remember the first black child coming into our school, these kind of things. So it's quite interesting that you remember these key things in history. But what were some of those things that happened on that day that people should know about, Ricardo, with the Carnation Revolution?
Well, we have talked about this before, and it has had some positive consequences that we are such a cohesive society in the sense that, we are basically one community, one language, one religion, one blah, 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 and that kind of makes it easier for us to, go through difficult times and, just pull ourselves out of the crisis that history throws at you. But one of the things that happened before the Carnation Revolution is that we all studied we all read the same books at school, north to south. Absolutely. And I've got one example here. When we were 6 and going on to primary school, we were given this book here, to learn from. Okay. And I will just show you a couple of things and read from one of the things that we were supposed to read at school, age 5 or 6. So, okay. And you can see here, it says respect authority. Okay, respect authority. And I'm going to translate as I read. Okay, so respect authority. The father is the authority in the family. Children are supposed to provide them with love, respect, and obedience. The teacher is the authority at school. All children must obey his orders or her orders and pay attention to his or her lesson. It is God who tells us to respect our superiors and to obey authorities. Okay, so it was like you can never question authority because it comes from God himself. Okay, and that was something we learned. Okay, up until the year 74, people in primary school would learn this. Okay, literally learn, because this was a lesson that we were supposed to read from our reading books. And the other thing that I wanted to show you is the stereotype that people were supposed to fulfill, and not what I would call gender. And from the same book. Okay, these are the tasks that girls were supposed to carry out during the day. Okay.
Yeah.
Cleaning floors, cleaning, washing clothes,
watering the plants.
Okay. And then if you go to the very end, you can see what boys were supposed to do. So work outside the home, do productive stuff in general.
Fishing.
But, you cannot see them cooking or
trim the bushes. Yeah. I don't do any of those things. I failed.
So this came to an end. And people do not realize that we were living like in a bubble, in a bubble of I don't know, of blind obedience to God, that women were supposed to do a certain number of things, but not other things, and men were supposed to do a certain number.
There was some clever indoctrination. There was some
subtle indoctrination. It was incredible indoctrination. Yeah. It was extremely clever. And by the way, I will not read any further from these books, but the truth is that some of them are marvelously written. I mean, it's not like it was not like silly. You may think it's silly today, but the way it was written
was good.
It was, and the way it was beautiful. The books were absolutely beautiful, so they were enthralling. As you were a child, you would read to them, and it was, look at the illustrations, they were absolutely wonderful. So, you were led to take these things as an ideal world and would try to, in a way, follow wherever the commands would be, and coming from those textbooks. Anyway, so there you go. So tying to, an historical event to what was reality then and what is now. Okay.
Crazy. Just I want to come back to another current event quickly, because when we spoke before we started recording,
I'm sorry, this was the historical account we were talking about.
That's
not the current
event.
Yeah. We're going into historical.
So current event, one of the things that I wanted to chat to you about, which when we spoke before we started recording, you said it's something that happens every March, which is true. But it's something that's still not very common for the rest of the world and surprises a lot of people, is that that Portugal runs for a month on renewable energy. This is something incredible that's not happening in a lot of places in the world.
No,
tell us about that.
I think it's one of the very few countries where you, if not the only, I think it's the only one in Europe where actually, usually for the month of March, because it rains a lot and there's a lot of wind, and so for that month we actually produce more electrical power than needed for the needs of the country. So we are unfortunately not able to export that power onto Europe because there are no connections between the Iberian Peninsula and the rest of Europe. I don't know if you know about that, but Iberia is an energy island. So we get gas from Algeria. Okay, so our gas does not come from Russia. It comes from Algeria. That's the first thing. Okay, and the second thing is that we are not connected to the rest of Europe. Well, we are through a very small cable that goes through the Pyrenees, which is got, the power that we can send through that cable is so little that it makes absolutely no difference. Now, this is a consequence of disunited Europe, which people talk about Europe and it being united. It's not true. There are a lot of national rivalries and a lot of national politics still standing in the way. France has got 63 nuclear reactors working. Okay,
63?
63
Wow.
In 18 different nuclear power plants. 68% of its power comes from nuclear power plants. Okay. Wow. And because nuclear power plants cannot be stopped, as you know, they must operate continuously. Okay, France has always prevented Iberia and its abundant sun and wind to actually provide the power to the rest of Europe because they prefer to do it themselves. And whenever there is a surplus from their nuclear power, they will, of course, provide it to the neighboring countries. But what happens is that they have now come to a point where, because of all of the gas being expensive, and even before that, and oil, they actually absorb all of the nuclear power they produce. And because of, they've got to do updates and stuff like that, a lot of the time, some of these nuclear power plants are actually down, because there must be, there is maintenance work, blah, blah, blah. So there is no surplus of power being produced by France any longer. Okay, so since Portugal and Spain, there are moments where they actually, and that renewable power is not continuous. So and sometimes they produce a lot, and it cannot be absorbed by the needs. So it would be helpful for us to actually export to the countries that have a power deficit, like Italy or like Germany, indeed. So we could be providing power to Germany, for instance, during the month of March, because we produce more power than we actually consume. But we cannot, because the power connections, the power lines simply do not go through the Pyrenees. And that was because of France. But anyway.
It could be another great Portuguese export like cork and wine.
Well, it inevitably, as we install more and more solar power plants and more windmills, we will be at a point where we will be producing more power than we can absorb. Okay, so we should, by all means, it should be one of the policy priorities of the Portuguese and Spanish governments should be to actually have those power lines going to Europe, and namely to the heart of Europe and to Central Europe, to countries such as Austria, countries that are power poor, like Austria, Germany, the Czech Republic, and all of that, because we will have many months where when we produce more power than we actually need. So it should be a policy priority, of course, provided that France lets us just to have a rite of passage and all of that. So it's complicated. But it's every March for 3 years now, Portugal is fully autonomous in terms of power production, and it actually produces more than it needs. So there you go. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Moving on to something
which by the way, just one thing, in the current situation of gas being cut to, by the way, Austria just accepted today to pay for Russian gas in rubles. So, the whole thing is just falling apart.
Oh, obviously. My goodness.
Yeah. So, it's just amazing. But anyway, just imagine every single country would have done what we have done, Portugal and Spain, and we would not be in the present conundrum. We would not be depending on Russian gas. So it is really one of the important policy measures that Europe should, take running is power autonomy and just rid ourselves of.
Yeah, also not to be beholden to another country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything really.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, that's at least we've got that in our favor. That's something to be proud of. Ricardo, next thing, a piece of architecture that makes.
All right, I'm going to talk to you about the Convento de Cristo in Tomar.
Beautiful.
Okay, it's a marvelous piece of architecture. It's a religious military. It's a religious military building. Why? It was one of the last monasteries built by the Knights Templar of our wild imaginations of the Middle Ages.
Okay, but now I want to just go in steps here, because who were the Knights Templar? And just for people that don't know, because these guys were amazing human beings, phenomenal warriors.
Right. Okay.
But who were the Knights Templar?
The Knights Templar came up in the Middle Age. They were religious, if you want, warriors that were sent to the Middle East, namely to Jerusalem, to free Jerusalem. Okay, so their ultimate mission was to free what is today Israel from the presence of the Muslim. Okay, so the Knights Templar were Christians. They would fight with a red cross, across their white kind of vests, and they were of course, people. They were like a special operations branch of the church. Okay, and they were autonomous within the church itself, okay, the Roman Catholic Church, and they were autonomous within the countries that would harbor them, okay? And they were like an armed arm, as it were, of the Christian kings of that time. And because they benefited from this autonomy, they had their own fortresses, their own monasteries, and they would relate with society at arm's length. So in a way, they were also a danger to many of the monarchs of that time, okay, because they were a power within a power, okay? And in Portugal, they were extremely important. And they stayed in Portugal, and many say that they have an influence to this day. And, that they kind of spread out under other expressions within the Catholic Church, and that there is still like a hidden network of Knights Templar who don't call themselves the Knights Templar anymore, but that still in a way dominates society, okay? But the Knights Templar built the Convento de Cristo in Tomar, so the Christ Monastery in Tomar. If you go there, you see it's got one piece of architecture within the church, which is called a charola, okay? A charola do Convento de Cristo in Tomar, which is a copy of what you can find in Jerusalem in one of in the I believe the church of the Holy Tomb, I think. So it is a copy of what you can find in Jerusalem, which was built there by the Knights Templar. Mm-hmm. It is a wonderful piece of architecture. Every Portuguese should go there once in a lifetime, because you just stand in awe. It's beautiful. It's gilded. It's painted. It's just a beautiful. It's an octagonal thing within a church, which itself is octagonal. Okay, it's really, really beautiful. And in that church, there is what we call a janela manuelina, which is the window which is built and decorated in the Manuelin style, which is the pinnacle of Manuelin style, Manuelin decoration of buildings. So the Jerónimos pale besides that one example, which is made in granite. And again, it's something that every Portuguese should go and see for once. It's really extraordinary, and it's something we should be proud of, not only because of that one very important role that we played in history. Of course, you look at it with different eyes these days, but we were like one of the countries that was the crusades going to Jerusalem, mainly from the UK, what is today UK, would actually stop by in Portugal on their way to Jerusalem. So it was, back then, we did play an important role in, let's say, freeing Jerusalem. If you can, I mean, today it is politically incorrect to say that, but it was the way.
That's the way they saw it.
Yeah, back then. So that's it. Yeah,
it's beautiful. I mean, the convent, the gardens in Tomar as well are beautiful. You walk through to go to the church. That whole thing is just stunning. It's a beautiful,
it is beautiful.
It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. Okay, so everybody needs to go look up Tomar or go visit
Convent de Cristo in Tomar. Yeah, okay.
And you eat well in Tomar if you go to Tomar.
It's true. A couple of very good restaurants there. It's true. It's very true. Very true. Yeah.
Well, we say that in almost every single Portuguese town. You eat well there. You eat well there, and you eat well there, and you eat well there. It's just part of the. It's part of the.
You can eat well for about €15, which is not bad either. So
good. Good. Still good. That's good. Okay, and then something made in Portugal, Ricardo, that you're proud of.
I think we never talked about multibanco, did we?
No,
now,
we never talked about multibanco.
It ties nicely with 25 de Abril. That's why I thought of multibanco. After the revolution, actually 1 year after, on March the 11th, 1975, the whole of the Portuguese industry and the finance industry and all of the banks, they were nationalized. Okay? So all of the banks were nationalized. And so, of course, everybody cried foul, what's going to happen? But one thing actually came out of that nationalized banking system, which was the multibanco system. Because there was only one owner, a system was set up, the multibanco system, that was common to every single bank in Portugal. So if you go to other countries, if you go to Spain, for instance, and you go to an ATM, okay, and if it's not your bank's ATM, you will pay a commission to withdraw money, because you will pay a commission to that bank for the money you are withdrawing from another bank. Okay, but in Portugal, the system was set up by what was then a very communist-leaning government. And so the whole thing belonged to everybody, belonged to the people, as it were. And therefore, it was there to serve the people. So you would actually be able to access the system without paying for it. Okay, and there was only one system to the country. Okay, so the interconnection was absolute, and to this day it still is. So Portugal is one of the very few, if not the only country in the world where you can access an ATM network system without paying for it, and that is the consequence of the nationalization of the banks back in 1975, March the 11th. That, in turn, enabled something which was quite pioneer. It was a pioneering thing back then, which was the Via Verde system. Because there was only one payment system, you did actually establish a system by which you would go through the toll, and immediately you would get charged, because as there was only one system common to every single bank account in the country, it was easy to set up. It was a radio signal, and that's it. And for many, many years, the system was replicated elsewhere. Of course, with the difficulty that in other countries you do not have one payment system, you have many, many as there are banks. Okay, so it was difficult to export, but again, and to this day, it's something extraordinary. Even if you look at Via Verde, you can pay stuff with Via Verde today. You can park your car, you can do a lot of things, and it all goes back to the fact that there is one centralized electronic payment system to the country, multibanco, and its roots, and the system is rooted in the revolution and the consequent communist nationalization of banks in 1975.
Via Verde is another great invention. So for people that don't know, it's a little chipping system that you put on your car, and it debits off your bank account. It's the little green V that you see on the motorways when you're driving, and you don't have to stop and take a ticket and then stop at the next one and put the coins, and you can park your car. You can do a lot of things with Via Verde. It's great, especially in Lisbon. Via Verde is amazing for that.
Oh yeah, Lisbon is absolutely extraordinary. I use it, everywhere I go. And never, at first I was resistant because I said, no, I mean, this is like Big Brother. But now it's just so convenient. There's no avoiding it, That's it.
Yeah, except you can lose track. You can lose track of how much money you spend.
Of how much you spend. That's quite true.
That part's dangerous. That part's dangerous. That part's dangerous. But yeah, Multibanco is amazing, and Via Verde is another one. That was made in Portugal as well. Via Verde.
It was absolutely made in Portugal. Yeah, the whole system. Yeah,
wonderful. Ricardo, as we end every episode, Portugal, the simple life, in a phrase or a poem or a song lyric or a story. Over to you.
I'm struggling with that in Portugal, the simple life. But perhaps we can, in the past few days, there's been this agony of us not fulfilling our promise as a democracy, okay, and there's been much agonizing about our young people actually going abroad and emigrating, and I always go back to this one fact that we are, and I think we have spoken about this many times before, that we have a huge diaspora, numbers differ. Some people like to say that there are 5 million Portuguese living abroad, which would mean that a full third of all Portuguese actually do not live in Portugal, because there are 10 million in Portugal and 5 million abroad. Some would rather say that 2.4 million were actually born in Portugal and today live abroad, whereas the 5 million actually refers to Portuguese and those who are of Portuguese descent but live abroad. Okay. The one thing about simple life is that in surveys conducted in several immigrant communities from different countries, where these communities actually go to, when asked what do they intend to do later in life, 78% of Portuguese abroad say, when I retire, I'll go back to Portugal.
Okay. 78%?
78%, yes. When I retire, I'll go back to Portugal. Now, this is Portugal, the simple life. Why would they come back here if they were not, able to make a living here and had to emigrate? Why do they want to come back? I mean, they were obviously running away from, poverty, exclusion, difficulties of all kinds. But still, when asked, probably in a country where they lead a prosperous life, they still say, given the chance, when I retire, I'll go back to Portugal. Okay. And there's this marvelous story that actually is in one of these books that I showed you before, which is the story of an immigrant that was in his dying bed, okay, and in a foreign country, unspecified foreign country, and he was living in a poor house, poor dwellings, and somebody came, just to pay him company, to be with him in his last moments. And in this very poor room, there was a magnificent clock. Go dong, 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 by the strike of every hour. And the person was there, just to keep him company, asked him, Senor Antonio, I don't understand. I mean, you live in such poverty, and yet you have this magnificent clock. Why did you spend, so much money buying this clock? And he said, well, I never had money to go back home, but at least when I listen to that clock, it is like the bell tolling in the church of my village.
I love that.
So, it kind of, that constant saudade, that is so pervasive to Portuguese life. And, it is in the simplicity of things that we find ourselves, like in the sounds of our youth. There you go. I
was I had quite a a moment the other day, because I was about to. It was on 25th of April, and I had. This is where it shows you I haven't been living here long enough, because I booked a couple of meetings for that day, and I'd forgotten that it was a public holiday, and pretty much our most important public holiday. And I was waiting for the meeting to start, and I knew that it was time to start the meeting, not because of my watch, but because of the church bells ringing in my village. And I was like, "You're really Portuguese now, Dylan. It's happened. You know, this is." That's when you know that you either by the bread van, you know, the hooter from the bread van, or the bells of the church. That's how I measured the time. So I knew I've arrived. I knew now I'm officially Portuguese if I'm using the church bells as my time.
You definitely are.
Ricardo, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation again. Lunch soon. I mean, you don't let me down.
Definitely. Okay, and that's a wrap then. Okay,
take care. All the best.
Cheers. Bye.
So thank you once again to Ricardo, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We'd love to hear from you. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. And as we say in Portugal, sejas bem-vindo. Welcome to the simple life.